Back. This is our final WorkWise webinar ahead of the holidays, and what a treat we have for you today. We are so happy to be joined today. Certainly, you all know me by now, Tasha Davenport, CEO of CASBO. Sarah Bachez has been with us through the entire series, the Chief Governmental Relations Officer here at CASBO, and just key in bringing these webinars together. Josh Schultz, Deputy Superintendent of Business Services for Napa County of Education. Josh, welcome. And Janet Riley, Assistant Superintendent of Business Services for the Merced County Office of Education. So we've got our COEs in here today, really just enjoying a really conversational session today where they're going to be sharing around some really important topics that next on the agenda. As the agenda is brought up, I just want to remind you that the PowerPoint is already posted in the Q&A session. You're welcome there. And Sarah's going to moderate the Q&A towards the end of our session today. So please feel free to do that. The session is being recorded, so we will be offering that back out as soon as that recording is generated. But today we get to talk about adapting the budgets for the current environment. And I think we're probably going to have a very fluid conversation over these next few weeks and months as we continue to adapt our budgets for the current situation. But we're going to start off today on the agenda, budgeting for during uncertain times. That's where we're going to go back. We've got security and IT and some of those privacy considerations, school facilities, obviously really important topics. We could probably dig deep on each one of these, but we're going to hit with our experts today on these 4 topics, the final being lessons learned and distance learning, and really focusing also on the communication and the relationship components around distance learning. So we're going to jump right in. Josh, Janet, again, thank you. Let's talk about budgeting during uncertain times. What do we need to know?
Well, Janet, you want to kick it off or you want me to start?
I'll kick it up. I think during budgeting during uncertain times, I fall back on the flexibility. We need to build flexibilities into our budget, multiple scenarios. Here at the county office and in Merced County, I have a lot of very conservative school districts that have some fairly decent ending fund balance and reserves, and it's been like that for a very long time. So when this hit, COVID hit, and things were shutting down, and then the deferrals came, there was a lot of worry about our cash. So basically they were able to fall back, most of them fall back on those reserves. And that took planning many years ago to be able to say, okay, a day will come when we're going to need this. So that's one of the things I wanted to bring up, is just constantly looking into the future and the importance of that reserve balance that we have.
Yeah, well, I think that flexibility is exactly the word that was coming to mind for me. And I was looking back on some of the common messages that were issued in the depths of the Great Recession, and that was a word that came up over and over again, that people need to be building flexibility into their budgets because things are so uncertain, right? And I know that coming into this year, I think many of us expected that the budget might drop off a cliff next year with the deferrals. We know that we got a much more optimistic forecast from the LAO recently, but we're not at all sure that the governor is going to adopt that. And that forecast depended on projecting a trend of 4 months through the rest of the year. And given what's going on in all of our communities with COVID right now, I think that that's a very risky bet at this point, that it's going to continue that way for the rest of the year, because there's so much disrupting in our lives right now. And when I think about flexibility, reserves, of course, is the starting point, but there's a lot of ways that people can approach that. So one is this idea of using your most restricted dollars first, right? And of course, we know everybody's been scrambling lately to find appropriate ways to spend those coronavirus relief funds that expire at the end of this month. But yes, you want to spend those dollars first, but you also want to make sure you're spending them in ways that give you the most bang for the buck. So one is, where can they appropriately and with an allowable expense free up more unrestricted dollars so that you have flexibility in the future. And then another is, how can you spend those dollars on things that are going to, one-time expenses that will give you long-term benefits? For instance, we'll talk a little later maybe about cybersecurity. Maybe now is the time that you can make those investments in upgraded, switches and equipment that will keep your network safe. That's an example of an expense that's one time, or at least one time for a few years, but that will really yield benefits for years into the future. And there's lots of other ways that you could approach that. I think also flexibility means really trying to work on, the mindset of your organization about everybody understanding that it's a team effort to allow us to be resilient and to allow us to have the financial resources to meet unexpected challenges in the future. So, I know when I first came into this organization, the Napa County office, back in 2009, the CBO, you had a kind of a culture of people had their little budget fiefdoms. And, they would say, my allocation of whatever it is, I got to make sure I spend it at the end of the year, or the CBO is going to take it back from me, and, oh, that's terrible. And they go and they, buy a bunch of crap, a bunch of extra books or extra resources that they didn't really need because they thought of it as, it's theirs and they're not going to get to use it. They don't use it by the end of the year. And it took a few years to get everybody to understand that, no, we all benefit if the organization has more flexibility. We all benefit if the organization has more reserves, more ability then to say, when you really need something in the future, yes, I can find you some extra resources to do that because we didn't waste resources on things that we didn't really need. And so I think, it's a mindset. It's a mindset for, your site leaders with their allocations. They not just think that they have to go spend it, or hoard resources or hoard supplies that they may not actually be the best way to use those dollars. I also think that now is a time with budgets to really be starting to think strategically about what the future is going to look like when we get past COVID. Because we're starting to see a light at the end of the tunnel. It may be months, it may be a year, we don't know, but things are not going to go back to just being the same, right? And you need to be thinking about what are the investments we can make now to prepare for that new reality, whether it's we're going to permanently have some form of distance learning, even if we cannot safely come back to our campuses, different ways of operating because of ongoing health concerns, whatever it is. So it's a good time to kind of take advantage of the crisis and really change the way people approach budgeting. And it takes a lot of transparency.
Josh, can I ask a real quick question, Josh? So how would, thinking about what you just said, which thank you very much for sharing that, is how does the strategic planning then, so most districts at some type of level, usually at the board level, does some type of strategic planning going into the future. And with all these unknowns out there, would this be like a multiple scenario where then the budget manager or the CBO would then prepare some budgets to go along with it? How do you see that communication?
Yeah, well, I mean, certainly from a budgeting standpoint, and I think we county offices as a group have been, taking this line for a number of years now. You do have to do multiple scenarios, and I think right now, for example, the MYPs that districts are submitting with their first interims, most of them are doing a zero COLA, which may have seemed optimistic a few months ago. Now seems maybe a little more possible. But they're also playing around, whether it's in Projection Pro or with their spreadsheets or other tools, with the potential of maybe a 5% cut. Also trying to look at what for example, what is it, a 1 and a fraction COLA that LAO projected might look like for them. But I think it's also just a conversation at the cabinet level with staff about, okay, we know right now we're just surviving, right? But we need to look out in the future. We need to take a moment to breathe and look out in the future and say, how do we want to, thrive in the post-pandemic world, and, what things do we think will return to normal, and what things do we think are going to be permanently changed? And then starting to cost those things out and think about how it might operate. All this disruption, again, is an opportunity to really think our educational programs going forward. And maybe there's things that we wanted to change for a long time that we couldn't change because of all the inertia, but everything's been blown up. So it's an opportunity, in a sense, to say, okay, now's the time to make those changes. Now's the time to make those adjustments. I don't know if that answered your question, Janet.
No, it does. And that's kind of what the approach that we've taken here, and even some of our districts too, is this is a new chance to look at what we're doing and prioritize. With local control funding formula, it seemed that at that point in time, we got this local control so fast. Categoricals were, swept away. We got some flexibility, but we still held on to some of those same mentalities for so long, that this period of time has shaken us up, that we can actually focus on those strategic things, what we're trying to do. Not having children in the classroom in some cases, that focus on that child or that student and that student's needs is even more intense right now.
I'll give you an example of a conversation we had recently. So, like many county offices, we have an alternative education program, what we call a community school. And, we've had some amazing discoveries with all the changes we've gone through. One is that a lot of those kids, surprisingly, have thrived with distance learning, because they're kids who actually were capable enough to do work, at a certain level, but just couldn't handle the regimen of being in a classroom and having to be quiet, sit still, and do things on a certain schedule. So when they're in our classrooms, for example, they might sit there and say, screw you, and I'm not going to do it. But when they can do it on their own time, by and large, and tune in for a Zoom for an hour and a half or something like that, they're succeeding. That's not true for all the kids, though. There are some kids who just can't really make it happen unless they've got the direct support there. So we're starting to imagine a program in the future that is a hybrid going forward, that will work with small groups, on campus in our facility, and that some kids will continue to do most of their stuff remotely. Maybe they'll only come on campus for art or for shop or, for therapeutic services, for instance, some of those things that are more difficult to do in a meaningful way remotely, but their academic work might be done that way. That changes the model in a lot of ways. So, for instance, we're finding we're having almost no disciplinary problems now, right? It used to be consume us, right, all day long. But when they're in small groups of 4 or 5 kids, it's not the same dynamic, and they don't act out the same way. So maybe we need fewer aides, right? But maybe we need to invest in more technology or reconfigure our facilities to have the spaces for the smaller groups. And so that's a small little program of 100, 150 kids, but I think those kinds of shifts are going to be happening in a lot of different ways in a lot of different places if we take the time to really think about it and take the opportunity to make the changes while we can, while we almost have a clean slate.
Josh and Jana, I know I've used the term lately, we're ambidextrous. We're still in that sort of finishing out that sort of crisis mode and then trying to think about innovations and strategically the future. So we're really ambidextrous in that way. A couple of things that I think are just so critical about what you say. I'm thinking back a few years ago when we were fighting for those reserves, which now we need. There's some conversation in there to circle back, with our policymakers about how important we felt that was and articulated that was. And now we have those reserves, which really have carried us in many cases through the crisis. So there's that full circle back to the policymakers. Like that was something we fought hard for, we needed, and it's proven itself out. I know that Keith Butler on the line, is one of our CBOs, is facilitating a roundtable session of CBOs on Friday mornings, like a coffee talk. And one of the topics came up about the importance of communication around this too, right? Where folks can easily look at these one-time dollars, those deferrals, that's the money sitting in there, and really that importance of showing them not only the scenarios that you've outlined, Josh, but also what the next few years look like. What does it look 3 years out? Because those scenarios are going to have to align with some potential, serious budget challenges. But and then finally, what I really love to hear in the example you gave about your students is you know, I came in from business, so I'm always looking at things from that perspective. We're talking about segmentation. We're talking about a marketing strategy that is actually segmentation, where you say, what are these, I'll use the word profile. I don't mean that in a personality way, but what are these personas, if you will, of our students? And there's probably a supportive model that may look very different for those slices of students. So anybody on the line that's going to start to think about you know, what those slices look like, really kind of dig in and do some research on market segmentation. And I think that'll help you develop some of those alternative strategies for that particular segment. So yeah, just wanted to share that. I love hearing what you're sharing, those really specific examples.
Yeah, and you know, the fact that our staff are, you know, sometimes slowly and painfully, but you know, almost all of them getting much more comfortable with technology because of this experience. You know, those tools are well geared to offering kind of customized types of offerings to students who are coming from different places and have different needs. So that, you know, that's one benefit that I think will come out of this, is that our teachers will be more comfortable using these technological tools and thus be more able to, you know, not have everyone turn to page 27 in the book and, you know, that's not going to work for all the different students that you're facing. You know, another example of kind of just the different models that are, you know, out there. There's a lot of talk right now about social emotional needs, right? And that, you know, we know that there are you know, a lot of mental health concerns with our students. You know, their experience of the pandemic, what their families are going through, economic disruption. And a lot of people trying to figure out how to deliver the services that are needed, especially in our current, you know, bizarre, sometimes distance environment. And you know, one thing I've been, you know, reading some research lately that, you know, brought up something that I thought was really interesting, and I haven't, you know, I have no expertise in this, but, you know, I'm looking for the opportunity, hopefully, to talk with some of our counselors about it. But you know, most of the world does therapy in a group model, right? Most of the world uses a group model to deliver therapeutic services because it's more cost effective. And in education, we almost never do that, right? I mean, I think it's you know, mental health services are one-on-one, you know, counseling is one-on-one. But maybe we can look and experiment with some of those things where, you know, we can deliver more service to our kids in a way that doesn't necessarily have to ratchet up our costs, because we don't necessarily have to hire a bunch more, you know, counselors, because maybe they can, you know, deal with more kids at the same time. I've also heard, at least in the distance model, that kids have been very reluctant to get on a Zoom with a, you know, with a therapist or somebody that they don't know. It's just not the same kind of experience. But in a group setting, that might be more comfortable with their peers who they know, and, you know, they can share some experiences. So I just, you know, I think there's a million opportunities out there, you know, if we can take the time to try to figure out what really makes sense.
Anything else on budgeting for uncertain times? Janet, did you want to add anything?
No, I think we've pretty much covered that. The flexibility, multiple scenarios, importance on our reserves and watching our cash, and using our dollars wisely, restricted before unrestricted, as Josh had mentioned.
Thank you. Before we leave this topic, I do want to say it reminds me, you know, for the CBO Symposium in January, we're really digging into that topic of budgeting for equity. And I think, Josh, to your point, right, we have those students that may remain in distance learning, but need a lot more technical support to make that happen in their home environment, which again, one more slice of that segmentation. So we'll be digging into that. And I think some of those strategies will emerge from that. Let's move on to our next session, security, IT, and privacy considerations. This is going to be a long list, I bet.
Well, it's a long list of acronyms I got from my IT people that I don't really know what they are. But, you know, I guess my thoughts about this is, you know, this is an area that I think we as an industry have underinvested in. to our detriment, and it's come back to bite some of us in recent months and years. I remember, I'm fortunate to have a really good and forward-looking IT team, and so they've been, very serious about security for quite some time. And I remember having a conversation with a consultant maybe 5 years ago, who was irritated with all the hoops he was having to jump through to get access to our network and get into some of our systems. And he made a statement, something to the effect of, education, nobody wants our data. Hackers don't care about us. He couldn't have been more wrong, but, that was, I think, a common kind of thing. We're not a target, right? They want defense contractors. But, obviously we are sitting on, massive amounts of personal and confidential information for our students, for our staff. We're dealing with large dollar transactions. And I think, as we've all come to realize, we are targets, right? I mean, I think everybody's getting bombarded with phishing attacks. We've seen the ransomware events in California and across the country in recent months. I know of districts in our region that have lost access to their data for days and sometimes weeks. It's a complete disaster. So I think, first of all, we have to take it very seriously. I think that CBOs need to be champions of cybersecurity, because I think that much of our staff tends to think of it as, annoying and overly protective and just a hassle, right? So if it just comes from the IT people, a lot of times I think people try to circumvent it, right? They try to avoid it. They try not to implement it. But if you have senior leadership saying this is important for all kinds of reasons, to protect our students, to protect our staff, that helps get the message out there. So some of the things that we've done, we've implemented cybersecurity training for all of our staff, because really the humans are the biggest vulnerability, even more than the networks. We do trial phishing attacks, that come from a software vendor that we've actually contracted with, to see who's making the mistake of clicking on the link and et cetera. We've joined some of these governmental associations that provide training and information for government agencies. So again, this gets to some of these things that I don't really know a lot about, but I know it's been very valuable. So this it's the MS-ISAC, Multi-State Information Sharing and Analysis Center, and it's free for K-12 to join. And they provide all kinds of tips about threats. They provide services where they will actually send you benchmarks about best practices for your networks, and all kinds of other benefits that help support better security. We've gone to dual factor identification for most of our passwords, right? That's one of the things people hate. That's a hassle, but they get over it and they learn how to do it, and it really makes you much more secure. Educating people on things like using a password manager. The one that I've been using for years is LastPass, but there's lots of other ones out there. And again, like I said earlier in talking about budgeting, you need to budget for cybersecurity, and you need to expect that the costs are going to go up. It's just going to be more and more complicated as the attacks keep getting more and more sophisticated. I'll stop with sharing that one thing that I have to go do now in the next couple of weeks is tell our board members, we're not going to allow you to forward your Napa County Office of Education email to your personal email anymore, because that's a threat. We don't have control of that. And a password reset or something goes to that. And the reason why it's coming up again, we tried to tell them this in the past, is because we had a board member who lost control of his personal email. Somebody sent out a message to everybody and their mother, and we actually had 2 people buy the darn Google gift cards that the person was asking for because they fell for the thing and thought that our board member was really in need of help. And so, like I said, the humans are the weakest point, but then it's also all the other practices that help protect us.
Well, I have a couple things to add to that besides and Josh actually brought it up in the very beginning, and that's that balance between keeping a secure network and allowing our teachers and our staff to actually do their work. And I have to say, you know, my IT staff over the last, I want to say 8-9 years, we have been working really hard to create resources for our teachers. So when iPads became that great new tool, and it's very helpful, a lot of downloading of apps right and left. And some of those apps were not secure. They were not keeping our students' data private. So we've put in a process where the apps are vetted ahead of time. We use Education Framework, and I believe CASBO in your latest newsletter had a link to a one that I was looking at last night, and I can't remember the name of it. But those types of services that actually go through and check on the back end and how that data is being collected, how it's being shared. So there's not a lot of time spent by an IT department or a teacher doing that vetting. And then we've created like a little resource. So if a teacher says, I need a particular calculator for a student with disabilities, we can say, okay, go to the little repository, and we have 3 or 4 different calculators you may want to try for that particular student. Or they'll send us something new and we run it through that vetting system. So we work all the time trying to create that balance, because keeping our network safe is high priority for us. And so creating even separate sections for the data. So our financial system sits out on its own server versus some of the other servers that are handling more of the common files and things like that. And then, like Josh said, the dual authorization for you to get into the network and those types of things.
Thank you both. And just a reminder, the last we knew, the last data point we heard, 63% of the IT departments report up to the CBO. So back to both of your points, the audience here has a tremendous opportunity to affect the important function of IT and really elevate that to a strategic conversation versus printers and toner and the way that we used to kind of maybe perceive our IT.
Well, there used to be a time that here in our county office that PCs were the way to go, and there was maybe a half a dozen of Macs that sat in the ed services department, and that's where they needed to stay. Well, through our IT, our county superintendent, and our ed services working together and talking about it, we're now able to have them integrate without a lot of issues, because that was part of the problem. The Mac users were having trouble connecting into the network. So we finding solutions, working with Apple and working with those ed tech specialists to make that connection.
Another thing I'll mention is that, at least in our office, we've been a big fan of software as a service and cloud-based services for a number of years. And I know that I think there's resistance to that in a lot of school district IT departments, feelings that maybe it's not secure, feelings that we don't have enough control. But our philosophy has been, we're kidding ourselves if we think we can do security better than Amazon Web Services or Microsoft, and not having to do the big capital investments over and over again of maintaining, more servers, et cetera. Even though, yes, an ongoing cost for some of these subscriptions, it gives you more flexibility. It makes it easier to upgrade to new and better services when they come along. So, we've been on Office 365, 7 or 8 years now. A lot of people use Google as well. We adopted DocuSign several years ago. We've gone to Ring Central for our phone system, which incorporates essentially a Zoom license for everybody who has a phone. There was a lot of resistance to a lot of those things when we did them, but they've served us really well in the current environment. And again, just a lot of flexibility, much easier to scale. So definitely advise people to look in that direction when we can.
Yes, great point, Josh. And I think you'll see companies are very proud to tell you what they spend on their data security. Some of them in the literally the $1 billion mark just for security. And to your point, we can't do that. So let's let the experts do what they do. Anything else on security and IT, privacy considerations? Janet, Josh?
No, other than to read the CASBO newsletter, because there was some really good information that just came out.
You're awesome. Thank you. All right,
Yeah,
moving right.
I was just going to add, that with those vendors, whether it's an educational product or something that you're using for productivity, really looking at and enforcing those digital privacy agreements is important. Don't assume that just because they're a big company that you can't negotiate different language. There's been a lot of good work done by some of the education law firms and technology associations in putting out sample language, and really encourage people to push your vendors to adopt those practices.
And then to that point too, Josh, is they change over time. So you may have edited and gone through something and entered an agreement, but it'll tell you right there in the fine print that it's subject to change. So keeping that always on your radar and looking at it.
Yeah, our partners over at Site do an amazing job. We're going to do a tech summit with them and dig into some of these issues because they're the experts on that topic as well. So let's move right along. We've got school facilities considerations. I bet there's a minute or two to talk about on that.
I think Janet's got a lot more expertise in this area than me, so I'm going to let her go first.
Okay, thank you. We run a fairly large special ed department, alternative school, and we have a couple small independent study charter schools. And so all of these programs provided education in very different formats. And so trying to come together as an organization of what we were going to provide to our teachers, what we were going to provide to our students as far as safety equipment. And of course, this started, way back in March when there was hardly anything to be had. So I used to call myself like the PPE police. I would go out and search every day for hand sanitizer, gloves, masks. That was my thing. Now these products are more available and easier to bring into the classroom, but because of the special population of students we have, and thank you, Sarah, she loaded up some pictures for us. Because of the special population of students we have, we've had to use various different solutions. So in this one, you can see there's a shield between this adult student and their instructor, where the teacher is able to reach through this shield and work with the adult student. The adult student's wearing a shield versus a face mask due to their personal their choice on that one. And so being able to find these particular items, being able to test them out, being able to make sure that the teachers are comfortable with them has been a very long process in our special ed department. Sarah, do you have another one in there that we can look at? This one's more of a group instruction. This is a high school classroom. This is our adult independent study setup. So this is at our Yosemite campus. Those two doors lead into the independent study offices where the teachers are at. And when the students have their appointments, they knock on the door, and the teacher will come out and they put up the face shield, or I'm sorry, the plexiglass barrier between them, and then they provide the service to those students at that time. And you can see kind of in the middle, they have a little, in the little blue containers where they have their hand sanitizer. And if anybody with really good eyes can see that they're actually in trigger sprayers, because there was a period of time where you could not get hand sanitizer in little individual bottles. So our solution was to go out and buy every trigger sprayer we could find and put hand sanitizer in it. This one was a picture taken from early summer, around August, right before we were to start. And this was, and it says waiting for kids, because that's basically where we're at. We were in August deciding whether we're going to open. This was their independent study book that had their materials in it. They each got a bottle. There were some tissues, and then their book. So it's This one is grade 3 to 5. This is during their lunchtime, and it's cut off a little bit, but the teacher's off to the side having her lunch. Each of the students has like a little cubby area where they can put their materials. All their chairs are labeled with their name. Their shields are labeled with their name. So those same materials will always be there and available for them. I'm trying to think of some of the other things we use. Oh, you can see the floors where they're kind of lined out with the different colors. That's where that desk is supposed to be. There's the measurement. These are, I believe these are the 3 feet one, because as long as we have the barrier around them in Merced County, we can be 3 feet apart. And this one was actually as of yesterday or the day before. So we can see we still have a few students in our class. What we're noticing, of course, is as the virus count goes up, we have less and less students showing up for in-person learning.
And Janet, you got a question in terms of Tiana is wondering what trifold shield was in the previous slide. So let me see if I could go back if they were meaning this one.
Yeah, so these ones, I can get the name and I can send it out, Sarah, as information of what some of the sources we received. But this one's a fold-up one. And it's very lightweight. And when it opens up, it'll sit straight up on the desk. And we use it to do like our in-person services. So like if we're going out like to the infants, and they can set that up in between the teacher and then the parents and the younger students. But I'll get that information and send it to you. But yeah, I like that one. We have some for the office. If we have to do a long training at past 15 minutes, because our restrictions in our office is we cannot spend more than 15 minutes less than 6 feet away from each other as a course of a whole day. So when you're trying to train somebody or teach them something, we put this barrier up to help.
So Janet, I have a question. Well,
And
I'm curious. So, all right, go ahead. I'll wait.
Sorry, I just wanted to say that as Tiana was mentioning, she appreciates this, but wanted to also say that as you can imagine, we have a myriad of barriers being used in our district, which adding options is always very helpful.
Yes, and the more we can get together to share those types of resources with each other, because what I've found is we deal a lot with a local, I think they're in Fresno for some of our plexiglass, and majority of our districts use that same source. They're all over California. Different manufacturers who produce something else with plexiglass have now turned to providing PPE for schools and hospitals and offices, and so the sources are out there now, and finding the ones that can sell it to us at a reasonable price and also deliver after, actually produce it once you sign that order, because sometimes getting that product in may take 6 to 8 weeks. So the supply chain is getting a little bit better as more have converted their manufacturing to these types of items.
So Janet, my question was, what's your experience in said about how effective these measures have been? And I'll just share, our experience in Napa. We've had preschools open since the summer with limited capacity. We've been doing some on-campus childcare with our extended learning staff since August. And most of our schools have been open for hybrid in-person since late October. And thus far, we've had single cases in cohorts shut down repeatedly, and probably right now in Napa County, I'm guessing we've got about somewhere between 10 and 12, 10 to 15 that are shut down at this moment, but not a single confirmed in-classroom transmission. So it seems to be effective when we take these measures, and I'm curious if you're having the same experience.
Yes, we're having the same experience, Josh. It's mostly when we have to shut down, it's because we don't have enough adults to keep the classroom operating. And it's the adults outside through some type of community spread versus then it's transmitting in the classroom.
Right, exactly. So, the only thing I was going to add about facility specific, obviously there's been some great guidance put out there by CASBO and CASH and others, about resources and ways to approach these challenges. And I think we're all learning, and people have upgraded their filters and bought air scrubbers and et cetera, et cetera. One thing that is kind of coming up for us that is new, that just people ought to have in their back of the mind, is that even though we got the clarification, some months ago that construction is an essential service, we're finding significant delays due to COVID in construction projects. And for instance, we have a project right now where we've just gotten a letter from the modular manufacturer saying 50% of their staff are out due to COVID, and that they expect delays and they can't tell us exactly how long. So I think we're going to see more of that before we see less, and so people ought to just be aware of it, that your schedules may get thrown, and obviously that time is money when you're talking about construction, so something to be aware of.
Thank you both. Two things. I can't help but think that the designers of banks are in their heyday right now, because a lot of this looks like our banking system. So those interior designers are having their moment. And I don't want to use this as guidance, but I did hear on one of the CBO calls that folks are spending their CARE dollars for the HVAC infrastructure and some of those intensive filtration systems. And is that, before I say it, is that allowed? Are you seeing that, Josh, Janet?
Yes.
So yeah,
yes.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. There's specific use that you can use it for, this type of personal protection, and also for health and safety inside the classroom. And what I always recommend anybody who's spending their CARES Act dollars is read the guidance, talk to your internal auditors, and also just write up an email to CARES if it hasn't been answered in the Q&A. Just write to them and they will help you give guidance. There's several pots of money. So I know we need to spend our CRF money really quickly. So you can use that first, great, but there may be another pot of money that you can use. So just keep those three things in mind. I just want to add one more.
14 days of Christmas.
Add one more quick thing, and this has to do with cleaning and disinfecting products. And as the CBO, right, custodial is under us, and one of the things that you want to know is exactly what are your custodians using to clean and disinfect. You want to make sure that they're using the proper personal protection equipment. You want to make sure that the products they're using, they're not mixing with products that shouldn't be mixed with each other. And read the SDS sheets yourself, and read the instructions on how to use it, and have discussions with your custodial supervisors and your facilities directors, and make sure you're all on the same page. Because as a CBO, I share that information out to cabinet, and then just like any other telephone call where you're sharing information, it gets slightly changed. So having it written out, sometimes your protocol's written out, but also sharing, because what happens is by the time it makes it back to the teacher, the person working in the classroom, it looks slightly different because they hear it different. So I've been working through that for the last month or so on different products that we have always used in the past that no longer we feel comfortable using. They're not any different than they were for us. It's just a different spotlight is on them.
Tasha, going back to your question about allowable expenses too, the one thing I just put in the chat to the host, CDE did just post their compliance monitoring instrument for CARES Act funding. And so, FICMAT, Mike Fine, and others have done a great job, and CDE obviously has been very supportive about helping people understand what's allowable. But I think if you want to make sure you really have the right documentation and that you've covered yourself, taking a look at that guidance, at that compliance monitoring tool will be very helpful. They also have posted their, I think their first round of districts that they're planning to visit for compliance monitoring in the spring.
All right, thanks for that. And let's wrap it up with a conversation on the lessons learned in the distance learning environment. And I'm going to ask also for you guys to expand on the communication and the importance of relationships when we talk about this as well.
Yeah, go ahead, Jen.
I was going to say the most important relationship I think for us has been with our public health and also with our bargaining unit and our members there. Having that communication, we're talking every week to our districts, and just being open and talking through the different issues with each other. But that partner of the public health, who supports schools, supports the in-person learning, but also gives us the appropriate guidance so we can do it all safely.
I think that one of the most important things we learned certainly in our programs, and I think our districts are finding this as well, is that there's a lot of concern, understandably, about learning loss and about our kids making academic progress. But we know we're also losing a lot of kids who are just becoming disengaged in this environment. And I think part of the issue there is that we really have to start with relationship first, right? Have to start with building that relationship with the students so that they feel safe, so that they feel engaged, so that they will stay with you in a distance learning environment before you can focus on the academics. And I think our staff are learning that if they just start to say, okay, we're on Zoom, but I'm just going to go through my standards and my curriculum in my usual way, it's just not going to work for a lot of our kids. That they are feeling stressed, that they are worried about COVID, they're worried about their families, their jobs. Some of them don't have enough to eat. And I know we're doing, making huge efforts to meet those kinds of needs. Yes, learning loss matters. And we're right to be concerned about that, but I think we have to build the relationships first before we can address those things. Interestingly, I mentioned our community school program. We've actually had some of the best attendance, and I don't mean the attendance that the parent calls and says, yeah, they're really here, right? I mean they've actually been on those Zoom calls at rates higher than we ever had in in-person attendance for those programs, over 90%, which for us is kind of a miracle. And I think it's because that program has always been about relationship first, right? About safe place, about caring and understanding the challenges the kids are going through. Yes, we have more kids not making it, advancing on the credits than we usually do, and that's a problem. But at least we know what's going on in their lives. We know that they've got safety issues that we can help address them because they're connecting with us. That's a very small program, so we can do extraordinary things like we're contacting every family every week to check in on them and how they're doing, and talking with them about how their child is or isn't making progress. We've got staff going out and sitting on people's front lawns. If the kid's not checking in, we're going to go find out. And I know that that's an impossible thing to do, at the larger scale in our districts. But I think people need to make the effort to engage as much as possible. And that if we just keep the kids engaged, we can catch up on the learning, if we have to later.
And I see that in our small programs, but I also see it in our smaller school districts where that we hear the term community school, where it's there without being formalized, that the community is very involved with the school. So the school staff know all the parents, know the families, can have that communication with them. So if the child's not there that day, it's or didn't Zoom in or doesn't look well or whatever, that communication between the parents and the school is already a trusted relationship. I have several friends that are school teachers at various different levels, and last night we were just having some conversation, and one of them was saying now the struggle is parents are getting sick, and so the kids are on the Zoom call without no parent support, whereas in the past at least one or the other parent would see them somewhere along in that distance learning mode, and the child saying my parents are sick and up in bed. So it's affecting those children too, trying to stay connected but not having the support of their parents.
Tasha, you kind of touched on this earlier too, but I know like with our larger district, we only have one good-sized district in Napa, Napa Valley Unified, about 16,000 students, and the need to actually dedicate some staff, to do tech support for parents at home, with young kids, the need to make kind of extraordinary efforts to communicate, almost daily, it seems like newsletters about what's going on and what's changing in the public health environment, how we're, altering our food delivery to, meet the needs of families. I know they've had, Zoom calls, amazing levels of engagement in some cases, Zoom calls with 3,000 parents on them, and people are, they want to know what's going on with their schools now, maybe in ways that they weren't paying attention in the same kind of way. So it's difficult to meet all the needs, but I think districts are really doing kind of extraordinary things to try to make it happen.
And I think that's the important part, is sharing those extraordinary things, getting the message out of what we're doing and how we're reaching the children, and take that spin from the negative to the positive, because we can share with each other what worked. So by sharing that, sharing the resources, sharing what worked, and communicating as an education, what we're doing.
And there's so much tactical, logistical chaos going on. Doesn't it feel good when you reflect on those moments, those extraordinary circumstances that you've just rolled to and you're delivering? But that's really where you walk away a little bit more fulfilled in this crisis for what you're doing to better education. It gives me chills. Hey, we're gonna turn it over to Q&A. Sarah, it's your turn to take the helm on any questions we have coming in.
And for folks, you're welcome to raise your hand feature, and that would allow you to speak directly. We would love to hear your voice. We know we have a lot of great folks on the line. One of the first comments that came in from Joanne is, will the legislature reverse the reserve limits? We've carried a high balance for the past several years and had to fight with our bargaining units and COE to keep these reserves. Now we're spending them down just to keep people in paid status. They saved us. This will be an item of discussion. As the LAO's report in November stated, we might hit the state trigger where it would trigger school districts to only carry about 10% of their reserves, which would mean dwindling that down. It's a topic that CASBO continues to articulate, that it's important to maintain healthy reserves, that 10% is only about a month's worth of payroll for some LEAs, and just really understanding that with the uncertainty of the finances as well as cash deferrals and not knowing if those will be rescinded or reduced or retabulated in this legislative session creates a lot of uncertainty for our school districts. So yes, this will be a topic that we will continue to bring up. We just don't know at this point what would be the final decision on it. But this is where we urge everyone to engage with your elected officials. On our CASBO advocacy page, we have a 5-digit zip code, a finder to find your legislative member. And so we encourage everyone to be engaging in those conversations. We have a few legislative members. We now know their assignments on both the Assembly and the Senate. They've received their committee assignments who will sit in the education committees. And so this is the time where we need to really articulate why flexibility is important. We have also posted the article that Janet mentioned from our CASBO newsletter that was released yesterday. For Josh, John asks, Josh, do you know which training system you were using? And this was under the IT section.
So if you're talking about the cybersecurity training, the one we're using now is, I believe, called Know Before, and like a B and the number 4, but I probably can find it and post it in the chat.
Yeah, that's the one we're using too, Josh. Know Before.
Yeah.
It's
great. It works well. It's relatively engaging and easy for staff to get connected with.
And while we wait to see if people are interested in participating, one question that we I did have. We've been reaching out to CDE to see where the status is of the CRF funds to make sure that school districts are spending those down. We're at 99.5% obligated or spent down, which is really exciting. I know there's only a handful of school districts that are carrying a balance about $18 million. Any recommendations of COEs that you could provide to districts who are maybe on that final push on how they could expend those funds, and any suggestion that you've given to school districts as we're trying to urge for folks to do that final push so that we don't revert monies back to the federal government?
Well, I guess the only thing I would say is I think a lot of times we scare ourselves into making things more restrictive than they are, and that, take a look at, see if you can get your hands on one of the presentations that my client put together that nicely lays out, the requirements. Take a look at that compliance monitoring guidance, but if you don't see something that says no there, I would assume you can do it, right? And I think you can be pretty expansive with some of the definitions. So, Janet mentioned earlier, we've got explicit allowance to use, PPE and protective measures, and that's all kinds of things. That's facility adjustments, that's equipment, maybe that's staffing in a different way for to allow for more space in a room. So there's probably a lot of things you're doing that you could spend these funds on. Have a conversation with your county office CBO if you need some guidance, because I know they've probably had a lot of these conversations with a lot of different people. But repurpose staff that you're using in a different way, that's allowable. A lot of different ways to go.
And I would say too, being that it's the 16th of December right now, is not necessarily looking to some big purchase unless you can actually get it through the door by the 30th. But to think about what have you already spent, and look at it through the lens that Josh just mentioned, that unless it totally says don't do it, you might have already done it, you just didn't code it there. So go back and look at what you bought for your teachers to provide distance learning, what you bought for your teachers to provide in-person learning. Did it, it could be simple as, and I think about this one all the time when I look at it. All of our teachers bought some laminating paper and laminators because they wanted to make sure that they could put that plastic sheet on there so they could wipe it down at the end of the day. Seems silly, seems small, right? But when you put it across a district or across the school and you add on all these other things onto it, you can get up to a few $100,000 on the supplies that you just bought to provide this to your children, to the kids. So that's my 2 cents.
And then when you were mentioning in terms of sanitation, on Monday, we hosted a capital webinar on redesigning the classroom, which is going to be posted on our CASBO Media, which is on YouTube, so anyone can view it. And one thing that was mentioned there is making sure that your teachers are also trained on what is eligible and allowable for sanitation purposes. If you are not informing them, they might bring something that might be considered pesticide. Have you had any experience on how you're training your staff to know what is an allowable cleaning solution product that they can use, and how are you communicating to make sure that you're in compliance to state laws that require that only certain products be used, since we're dealing with children?
So we do a couple different things. So every year, annually, we train all our instructional staff on pesticide training. So they do that very basic training. And then we only provide to them, right? Right now, we just have them using a bleach product inside the classroom. And that's another long story. We need a couple hours for that one. And then it's just, we rely a lot on our facilities, our coordinators, our principals to do the sweeps to make sure there's nothing in the classroom that may counteract with those products we're already providing. A lot of communication. We went through recently of folks asking that, can I just run down to Costco and get these sanitary wipes, and then just reminding them that that particular brand or whatever may not be what you actually need. We have it here. We provide it for you. Just order it from this source, and making sure that those items are there. And very few barriers for them to get it.
So I'll turn it over to Tasha.
All right, what a great hour. Thank you for the reminder that this is an opportunity for us. It may not feel like it right now, but this is an opportunity. And, in that kind of that third stage of crisis, typically you've got that crisis response, then you start to settle into some new norms, and there is a thrive on the other side of this. And so thank you again for that reminder. We appreciate learning from you today. Both your willingness to take your precious time and also just so generously sharing your knowledge, Josh and Janet, we really appreciate that. I want to wish everyone a very happy holiday. Please be safe and try to enjoy some well-deserved downtime in the period ahead. And we will look forward to picking up these conversations in the new year. Thank you again. Safe holidays.
Thanks, Tasha. It was a pleasure. Always enjoy talking with you.
Yes, thank you, Josh. Thank you, Tasha and Sarah. And thank you, Michelle, for all the back-the-scene work you're doing.
You bet. Have a great one.